December 16th, 1944. Early morning, Monschau, Germany. The frozen earth trembled as another salvo of American artillery screamed overhead with the familiar whistle that every soldier on both sides had learned to interpret, to calculate survival chances, to know when to take cover. But something was catastrophically, incomprehensibly different this morning, something that violated every tactical assumption German veterans had built through years of Eastern Front combat. The shells weren't striking the ground or the trees where soldiers could find shelter behind rocks and fallen logs. They were detonating in mid-air, precisely 30 to 50 feet above the advancing German positions, creating a lethal rain of steel fragments that no foxhole could protect against, that no amount of experience could evade. Among the 326th Volksgrenadier Division attacking the 38th Cavalry Squadron's positions, soldiers who had survived Stalingrad, Kursk, and the endless retreats across Russia encountered something that defied their understanding of artillery warfare. These weren't the artillery patterns they knew, the predictable impacts you could time, the safe zones behind cover, the protective value of entrenchments that had saved lives for centuries. This was death delivered from above with mathematical precision that seemed to possess intelligence. At that precise moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had just made one of the most consequential unauthorized decisions of the Battle of the Bulge, a decision that would save American lives while potentially ending his career. Against standing orders, without permission from higher command, without authorization from anyone, he had ordered his gunners to load shells equipped with the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal, proximity fuses. These revolutionary devices, containing miniature radar systems no larger than a coffee can that could detect their distance from targets and detonate at the optimal height, would multiply artillery lethality by a factor of 50. The mathematics of death were about to be rewritten in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and German soldiers would pay the price of American scientific superiority with their lives. What the German soldiers advancing through morning fog couldn't possibly know was that they had just encountered a weapon so revolutionary that it would transform not just this battle, but the very nature of warfare itself, a weapon that General Eisenhower would later claim could have made D-Day impossible if Germany had possessed it first. Operation Wacht am Rhein had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht, Hitler's last gamble, his final desperate throw of the dice. 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all masked in secrecy through the fog-shrouded Ardennes. The Führer had assured his generals that this offensive would split the Allied armies, recapture Antwerp, and turn the tide of a war that was slipping inexorably toward defeat. The initial bombardment at 0530 hours on December 16th had achieved complete tactical surprise with devastating effect. German artillery fired at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85-mile front, a concentration not seen since the great offensives of 1918. American intelligence had failed catastrophically, not detecting the massive build-up. Many frontline units were either green replacements fresh from stateside training or exhausted veterans sent to this quiet sector for rest. But at Monschau, Colonel Axelson faced an impossible tactical situation that conventional weapons couldn't solve. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit never intended for sustained defensive combat, was being overwhelmed by superior German forces advancing in overwhelming numbers. Conventional artillery couldn't stop the assault, ground bursts were ineffective against dispersed infantry, time fuses unreliable in the freezing conditions. In desperation born of necessity, Axelson made his historic decision. Deploy the secret proximity-fused shells without authorization, knowing he might face court-martial but recognizing that following orders meant certain defeat and death for his men. The effect was immediate and devastating beyond anything either side had witnessed. German soldiers advancing in traditional assault formations tactics perfected through years of combat suddenly found themselves under a type of fire they had never experienced, that their training had never addressed. The shells exploded 30 to 50 feet above them with uncanny precision. Each detonation created a cone of fragments that covered vastly more area than conventional ground-burst shells. fragments that came from above where no shelter existed. Veterans who knew how to take cover from normal artillerymen who had survived battles from Normandy to the Vistula were cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, in ditches, anywhere they sought shelter. The protective value of terrain had been negated by American science. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. A Manhattan Project-level achievement focused not on atomic physics but on miniaturization and mass production. Unlike conventional shells that required direct impact or time fuses that often detonated at wrong heights, wasting their lethality, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes, depending on the model, that could withstand the incredible 20,000 times gravity force of being fired from an artillery piece, acceleration that would instantly crush a human body. The physics involved were staggering in their complexity. At the moment of firing, the brutal acceleration would crush a glass ampule containing electrolyte, creating a battery that powered the tiny radar for the shell's flight duration, typically 30 to 60 seconds. Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with Manhattan Project-level intensity and secrecy. The laboratory, cunningly disguised as an abandoned used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak operation. Security matched that of the atomic bomb program with compartmentalization so strict that scientists working on adjacent aspects couldn't discuss their work. Workers couldn't tell families what they did, and each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking if captured. The technical challenge had seemed insurmountable to most engineers. Vacuum tubes designed for living room radios, delicate glass structures, had to be completely redesigned to survive being fired from cannons, producing forces that shattered steel. They had to function while spinning at extreme rotational speeds that created centrifugal forces, work in all weather conditions from Arctic cold to desert heat, and be sensitive enough to detect targets without premature detonation from rain or birds. The breakthrough came through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the entire electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes, he would later discover Earth's radiation belts using similar miniaturization, were no larger than pencil erasers, yet contained all the elements of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily, one every 2.16 seconds, around the clock. Over 100 companies contributed to this monumental effort: RCA, General Electric, Sylvania, Crosley Corporation, each bringing specialized expertise. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1,940 seconds, dollars equivalent to roughly $18 billion today, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending, proving America's willingness to invest in technological superiority. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis that rippled up through headquarters. He had violated direct orders restricting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft use only, orders based on legitimate fear that captured examples might be reverse-engineered by German scientists. But the devastating effectiveness at Monschau was undeniable, impossible to ignore. The German attack had been stopped cold with casualties that shocked both sides, entire companies eliminated in minutes. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters rapidly through after-action reports. General Eisenhower, recognizing the desperate situation developing across the Ardennes as German spearheads drove deeper, formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, just 5 days after Axelson's unauthorized deployment, all restrictions were lifted and proximity fuses were released for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The rapid distribution that followed demonstrated American logistical superiority operating at peak efficiency. Within days, proximity-fused shells were being delivered to artillery units throughout the Ardennes by the tens of thousands. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation just as the German ring closed around the town. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion, with their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwestern approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each unit discovered the same revolutionary truth. Proximity fuses transformed artillery from a support weapon requiring careful forward observation into a decisive battlefield tool that worked even in fog, darkness, and snow. Forward observers no longer needed to carefully adjust fire through bracketing techniques. The fuses would find their own optimal detonation point automatically. Accuracy requirements decreased while lethality increased exponentially. The siege of Bastogne would become the ultimate demonstration of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, completely surrounded and outnumbered, held the vital crossroads town against repeated German assaults, relying on artillery as much as infantry. Their support included the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers capable of firing proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired exactly 7,676 rounds, according to official unit history. Although not all were proximity-fused due to limited supplies, those that were had devastating physical and psychological effects. German assault waves aiming to storm Bastogne's perimeter simply melted away under the overlapping patterns of airburst barrages, entire platoons destroyed in seconds. The December 22nd German assault following General McAuliffe's famous "nuts" reply faced just this fate. Infantry advancing across snowy fields had no time to find cover as shells exploded overhead, fragments raining down in a deadly hail with no safe zones. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion played a critical role as well. Their M1A1 155mm Long Tom howitzers created a ring of death around Bastogne. The proximity-fused 155mm shells detonated higher, covering larger areas, devastating everything beneath, and frequently causing attacking Germans to flee or disperse in panic before reaching American lines. Perhaps the most thoroughly documented demonstration of proximity-fused lethality occurred at the Sauer River near Echternach on December 25-26 witnessed and recorded by General George S. Patton. Patton's Third Army, racing north to relieve Bastogne, caught a German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river under cover of darkness and fog, believing themselves hidden from American observation and safer from artillery. Traditional shells would have required careful target bracketing, allowing time for escape. But proximity-fused shells detonated above the moving German formation, each airburst forming a 30 to 50-foot cone of destruction. Patton wrote, "The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies." A whole battalion had essentially ceased to exist. The psychological impact reverberated. News spread across German units. Soldiers refused to cross open ground or rivers. Defensive tactics failed against a weapon that rendered centuries of battlefield experience meaningless. The Ardennes' dense forests, which Germans counted on for concealment and tactical advantage, became death traps under proximity-fuse bombardment. Airburst shells detonating above the treetops multiplied the killing zones. Metal fragments, combined with thousands of wooden splinters, launched at blistering speeds. Traditional defensive positions, digging foxholes beneath trees, hiding behind logs and root systems, became useless. Protection came from nowhere. The threat came from above. American artillery recognized the force multiplier. A single proximity-fused 155mm shell above a forest could clear a tennis court-sized area in seconds. German units trained in woodland tactics adapted by spreading out, but this only made them more vulnerable to the weapon's wide area effect or left them isolated. Massing together for support made them more likely to be wiped out together by a single shell. There was no tactical adaptation that could mitigate the new threat. Proximity fuses had rewritten the tactical playbook. Inside every fuse, a tiny radio transmitter sent signals at 180–220 MHz. As the shell approached the ground, returning radar signals triggered an electronic switch at the optimum moment, detonating the shell at precise height. The system had to be reliable, rotating at high speeds, braving brutal 20,000 grams acceleration, and tolerating everything from Arctic cold to barrel heat and humidity. American engineers solved reliability with extreme precision. Each miniature vacuum tube packed with silica gel, every solder joint hand-inspected. Mass production maintained near-atomic quality control thanks to industrial techniques pioneered just for proximity fuses. Optimal lethal heights were determined by months of range testing: 30 feet for 105 mm shells, 50 feet for 155 mm guns, more for larger calibers. Every variable, from tree height to snow depth, became an input for maximizing kill radius. Studies showed proximity fuses increased lethality by 5 to 10 times versus standard shells. On open ground, fragment area grew 50-fold. For anti-aircraft use, the jump was even starker. V-1 flying bomb downing rates improved from 17% to 79% with the first American proximity shells. The German intelligence failure regarding proximity fuses proved catastrophic in ways that extended far beyond the battlefield. In December 1944, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot during their advance, capturing approximately 20,000 proximity-fused shells, an intelligence windfall that should have triggered immediate countermeasure development. Instead, German technical experts examined the captured fuses and declared them impossible, a conclusion rooted in institutional blindness rather than technical analysis. The presence of vacuum tubes in an artillery shell contradicted everything German engineers believed about electronics and ballistics. The delicate tubes they knew couldn't possibly survive the 20,000 grams forces of cannon fire. They concluded the Americans were using some form of magnetic detection, or that the visible components were decoys hiding the real mechanism. This failure stemmed partly from tragic irony. Germany had actually led proximity fuse development before the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had working prototypes by 1940, demonstrating feasibility. But Hitler's order cancelling all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months to production had terminated the program in its infancy. German engineers couldn't believe the Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned as too difficult. The mathematical precision required, the miniaturization challenges, the quality control at mass production scale, all seemed beyond possibility. The deeper irony: German electrostatic proximity fuses showed 95% reliability in tests, using electrical capacitance changes rather than radar. Had development continued without Hitler's interference, Germany might have fielded proximity fuses by 1941, potentially changing the war's entire trajectory. Hermann Göring would later admit during Allied interrogation that German fuses were 3 or 4 months from production when the war ended tantalizingly close yet fatally late. December 25, 1944 brought no holiday respite. German units attempting to use Christmas for resupply and reorganization discovered that proximity fuses recognized no ceasefire, no tradition, no mercy. Field kitchens serving hot meals to frontline troops came under devastating bombardment. Supply convoys moving along forest roads were caught in the open. Assembly areas where units gathered for reorganization became killing grounds. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, most proximity fused. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid, accurate fire that caught German units completely unprepared for the holiday onslaught. The psychological impact was severe and cumulative. German soldiers had learned through Eastern Front experience to move during poor weather when Allied aircraft couldn't fly and observers couldn't spot them through clouds. Proximity fuses eliminated this sanctuary completely. Death could arrive at any moment, in any weather, with no warning beyond the brief whistle of incoming shells. The traditional soldier's calculation, "When am I safe?" had no answer anymore. There was no safe time, no safe place, no safe weather. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeni's elite commandos attempted to capture Malmedy as part of Operation Greif. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but specially selected troops who had rescued Mussolini from Gran Sasso, nearly captured Tito in Yugoslavia, and infiltrated American lines wearing captured US uniforms. They represented the absolute best Germany could field warriors hand-picked for skill, courage, and fanaticism. They met devastating proximity-fused artillery fire that transformed their American disguises from tactical advantage to death shrouds. The shells exploded overhead with what seemed like uncanny precision, as if the weapons could detect imposters. While exact casualty figures remain disputed in historical records, the attack failed catastrophically, with losses so heavy that Skorzeni's offensive operations effectively ended. The psychological breakdown among elite SS troop soldiers indoctrinated with beliefs in German superiority, trained to the highest standards, proved particularly significant. Some survivors reportedly charged directly toward American lines, preferring quick death in small arms fire to continued bombardment by weapons they couldn't understand or counter. This represented complete breakdown of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical troops. The production miracle behind proximity fuses matched any wartime industrial achievement and deserves recognition alongside more famous programs like Liberty ships or B-29 production. By December 1944, over 100 American companies had converted to fuse production, abandoning profitable civilian manufacturing for war work. Crosley Corporation stopped making refrigerators to assemble fuses. Emerson Radio retooled from home electronics. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities exclusively to the proximity fuse program. Quality control exceeded anything previously attempted in mass production of any consumer or military good. Each of the 130 components underwent individual testing before assembly. Every solder joint was inspected under magnification by workers trained to detect the slightest imperfection. Random samples from each production lot were actually fired from artillery pieces to ensure survival under combat conditions. The rejection rate was ruthless. Any component showing even slight deviation from specifications was discarded without hesitation, regardless of cost. The workforce, predominantly women replacing men who'd gone to war, maintained this precision while working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. They couldn't know what they were making due to security compartmentalization so strict that workers on adjacent assembly lines couldn't discuss their work. They knew only that it was vital to winning the war, that American soldiers depended on their precision. By December 1944, American industry was producing one proximity fuse every 2.16 seconds. Around the clock, a production rate that seemed impossible even to the engineers who designed the system. The cost reduction achieved through mass production was equally remarkable. In 1942, each fuse cost $732 more than an average worker's annual salary. By December 1944, relentless optimization had driven costs to $18 per unit, while maintaining or improving quality. This efficiency allowed production of 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 deployed during the Battle of the Bulge alone. General Patton understood proximity fuses' value better than perhaps any field commander. His Third Army, driving north to relieve Bastogne, used them as breakthrough weapons rather than mere fire support. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed entirely new tactics specifically for proximity fuse employment that would influence artillery doctrine for decades. Williams pioneered time-on-target concentrations using proximity fuses. Multiple battalions firing simultaneously, so shells arrived together at the same instant. When dozens of proximity-fused shells detonated simultaneously at optimal height over a target area, the effect was apocalyptic. German soldiers called it the bell toll of death, describing the sound of multiple airbursts occurring in rapid succession. In the week between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity-fused shells, 1/4 of the total, deployed during the entire battle. The results were decisive in breaking German resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne, allowing the 4th Armoured Division to reach the surrounded garrison. Patton himself, never shy about praising effective weapons, wrote in his memoir, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum defensive effectiveness. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical high ground against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, December 17th, 19th, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, with approximately 40,000 being proximity fused. These 25% of shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. The mathematics were undeniable. German attacks launched repeatedly up steep forested slopes met walls of airburst steel that created impassable zones of death. Entire companies disappeared in seconds. Bodies piled so thick that subsequent assault waves had to climb over their own dead to continue advancing a psychological horror that broke even SS veterans. After 3 days of futile attacks, the assaults ceased. The elite of the Waffen-SS had been shattered by American technology, their tactical skill rendered meaningless by scientific superiority. On January 1st, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, 900 fighters attacking Allied airfields in a desperate surprise strike. The attack achieved complete initial surprise, catching many Allied aircraft on the ground and destroying or damaging over 300 planes. But returning German pilots met walls of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire that transformed their victory into catastrophe. Of 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, most using proximity fuses that had revolutionized air defense as completely as they'd transformed ground combat. The kill rate stunned both sides. German pilots trained to evade predictive anti-aircraft fire diving, weaving, using evasive maneuvers perfected over years, found shells detonating precisely where they would cause maximum damage regardless of their maneuvers. The Luftwaffe, already crippled by fuel shortages and pilot losses, never recovered from these losses. Proximity fuses had destroyed Germany's last offensive air capability in a single day. By early January 1945, maintaining complete secrecy had become impossible and perhaps unnecessary. Too many shells had been fired. Too many soldiers had witnessed their effects. Too many German prisoners had been interrogated about the mysterious airbursts. On January 6th, the War Department authorized limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that multiplies the effectiveness of American guns without explaining the technology or revealing technical details that might aid enemies. German intelligence finally grasped the weapon's full significance, but far too late to develop countermeasures. A January 10th report from Foreign Armies West stated with bureaucratic precision, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has caused severe casualties among our forces in the Ardennes. No effective countermeasures exist." That final sentence, "no effective countermeasures exist," represented German acknowledgement of technological defeat. They understood what was killing their soldiers but lacked any means to prevent it. Post-war analysis revealed proximity fuses' truly decisive impact beyond individual battles. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall German commander during the Bulge offensive, stated during interrogation, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso von Manteuffel, 5th Panzer Army commander, testified even more directly. "The American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in the air. They caused panic even among veteran troops who had survived the Russian front." The statistics tell an unambiguous story of technological dominance. 200,000 proximity-fused shells fired during the Battle of the Bulge, accounting for an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total German losses. achieving 5 to 10 times greater effectiveness than conventional ammunition. Requiring no forward observation in poor weather conditions, the weapon had achieved what no amount of conventional artillery could. It had multiplied American firepower to levels that negated German numerical and tactical advantages. Behind every statistic lay human tragedy on a scale that numbers alone cannot convey. German soldiers, many of them teenagers, conscripted in the war's final desperate stages, died in ways that traditional warfare had never contemplated. They were killed by weapons that seemed to possess intelligence, that could find them wherever they hid, that turned the very air above them into a killing zone. The psychological trauma of facing such weapons, even for survivors, was profound and lasting. American production workers paid their own price in stress and sacrifice. Factory accidents were hushed up for security reasons. Workers at Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other facilities suffered breakdowns from exhaustion, working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week under intense pressure. They produced weapons of unprecedented lethality without knowing what they were making, carrying that burden in enforced silence even from their own families. Yet the moral calculation of war is never simple or comfortable. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American lives. Without proximity fuses, shortening the battle and multiplying defensive effectiveness, how many more would have died? How much longer would the war have lasted? Every day the war shortened, potentially saved thousands in concentration camps awaiting liberation. The moral mathematics are uncomfortable but unavoidable. The proximity fuse program generated technological advances that transformed post-war society in ways that extended far beyond military applications. The miniaturized vacuum tubes developed for fuses became foundations for modern electronics and the transistor revolution that followed. Quality control procedures established for fuse production, statistical sampling, zero-defect manufacturing, systematic testing became industry standards that shaped post-war American manufacturing dominance. The organizational methods coordinating hundreds of suppliers across the country pioneered modern supply chain management techniques still used today in industries from automotive to consumer electronics. Dr. James Van Allen applied his miniaturization expertise to satellite instrumentation, later discovering Earth's radiation belts that bear his name. The radar principles evolved into modern guidance systems for everything from missiles to commercial aviation. The concept of autonomous sensors making split-second decisions became the foundation for all smart weapons. Every precision-guided munition today, from cruise missiles to laser-guided bombs, descends directly from the proximity fuse, the first weapon that could sense its environment and choose when to detonate. The revolution begun in the Ardennes continues on modern battlefields where smart weapons dominate warfare, proving that the technological transformation of December 1944 was permanent and irreversible. The Battle of the Bulge ended January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat, their offensive capabilities shattered. Hitler's last gamble had cost Germany approximately 100,000 casualties while achieving nothing of strategic value. American losses totaled 75,000, including 19,000 killed, a terrible price, but one that would have been far higher without proximity fuses. The weapon had proven itself not just as an artillery improvement but as a war winner that fundamentally changed warfare's mathematics. General Eisenhower's assessment that German possession of proximity fuses might have made D-Day exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible, underscores their strategic importance. They weren't merely better shells, they represented a revolution in military technology that gave the side possessing them overwhelming advantage. The German soldiers who faced proximity-fused artillery in December 1944 experienced something unprecedented in military history. Death delivered by shells that seemed intelligent, that could find them anywhere, that transformed the very air into a killing zone no courage could overcome. Their experience marked warfare's irreversible transformation into the technological age, where scientific superiority trumped tactical skill, where industrial capacity determined outcomes more than warrior spirit. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944, through the systematic deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, Proximity fuses demonstrated that innovation could provide decisive military advantage, that the side with superior science would likely prevail regardless of numerical or tactical disadvantages. The convergence of American industrial capacity, scientific genius, and tactical adaptation created a weapon that helped determine not just this battle but the war's outcome. The proximity fuse story is ultimately about transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It proved that industrial democracy could produce weapons of devastating effectiveness, that innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage, that the side with superior science and production capacity would prevail in total war. These lessons shaped not just World War II's remainder, but the entire structure of warfare that followed, establishing principles that govern military competition to this day. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare truly arrived. The mathematics of death were rewritten by tiny radar sets in artillery shells, forever changing how humans wage war. The German soldiers who died beneath proximity-fused airbursts were casualties not just of a particular battle, but of a revolution in military affairs that continues shaping our world today.